Well, this radio is a Murphy 865. I believe it's from the early 1970s, and my thinking on that is informed by the fact that if I look at the manual for it, we can see that it's got this reference of 11071. So I think that is a date for when the service manual was written. I also thought maybe a clue was in this Boreham Wood here, because Boreham Wood is generally spelt as one word nowadays, except that the football team actually still spells it as two words, and I thought that might date it as well. But the changeover from having two words to one word for this seems to be a bit unclear when that actually happened. I've looked around the internet, and I've looked at the local newspaper who claimed they were the ones who popularised it in 1972, but maybe they're just blowing their own trumpet there, I don't know. Anyway, this is not a channel about the history of Hertfordshire towns, it's a channel about radio. So let's get back to the radio itself. One of the things that strikes me about it is its similarity to another one of my radios, and one of my favourite radios, which is the RGD Rover. If you look at the design of them, obviously one of them's got a sort of fake wood finish and the other one's got a more traditional white plastic finish. We'll come to that in a moment. But the design of how they're laid out is quite similar, having the wave change switch here and the two controls here, about roughly the same sort of size. This one's a little bit bigger perhaps. Same sort of scales. The tone control switch, which is actually just a top cut on this one, is on the side, but this one it's on the front. So I think they're very similar radios. They're not from the same stable. So this was from a company taken over and owned by ITT, and this radio, well, as we saw in the service manual, Murphy were a company that ended up being taken over by the Rank organisation, and their famous logo, the man with the gong, is also on the back of here. Another thing to notice about this is it's got that typical yellowing of plastic that you got of things that were made in those days, and you can see that even more so if you lift this handle up here. So you can see the original colour of the plastic underneath it. Now, if there's a few people on the internet, the one I like to watch is 8-Bit Guy, who looks at a lot of old computers, and he's fixed this in a few cases by just soaking it in peroxide and leaving it in the sun for a day or so. At the moment, although it is quite sunny outside today, but over the last week or so, this has not really been an option in this country, whereas it might be in certain parts of the USA. So I'm not going to leave this outside, and I don't have any peroxide anyway. So fixing the yellowness of this thing will probably have to come a bit later. In general, there isn't a lot wrong with it. It obviously needs a bit of cleaning up, like a lot of these things do. It does work.
Big A cam as well. Peterborough Sports at Hitchin in the Southern Premier Central today. It's been tough for the sports over the winter.
In my mind, it's not quite as good quality sound as the RGD.
Yes, there is, because they last weekend only the third win of 20.
I mean, I think on this FM station here on Radio Cambridgeshire, it's too bright, it's too trebly, and when you put the bass cut in, the treble cut in,
Tough game to the next 4 days, because they take on Rutland and Diamond.
well, now it's too muffled. So maybe we can do something about that and make the sound improve a little bit. Other than that, it's in a pretty good state, really. Right, so I think the first thing is to get the batteries out. It actually takes 3 C cells, which is unusual. Most of them take 4. So this is actually only running a 4.5 volts. Doesn't seem to suffer that much. Right? I know I said the sound quality isn't quite as good as some of the others, but it seems to be okay on 4.5 volts. And you'd think probably you could. It's one of those things. I think with 6 volts or 4.5 volt radios, you can probably run them off a USB charger with a bit of adaptation. It might be a bit of an interference issue. So I've got the out. There is a little bit of cracking around the case as well, which is unfortunate, but these things happen when things get to that age. So I'm guessing that it's just these two are going to be the big ones for getting it apart. Now I know there is always a bit of a faff getting the RGD apart, so this might be the same sort of thing. Is that actually coming out? I don't think it is, just with those two things. No, I'll tell you what, just needs a bit of extra work. It's not as hard as I thought. You just pull the thing apart with your fingernails around the top. So let's have a look inside it. Yeah, it should be fairly easy to get at things. Here is the single board. It is quite similar in a way to the RGD in the single board layout, except that those switches are moved over here on that one. So that's a normal sort of switch, and then there's this sort of Paxil-in type thing that is moving the waveband change switch. And then these things here, I'm guessing are custom jobs, because I can't quite see where the other end of that is. Oh, that's the tuning control anyway. Yeah, so that, I don't know, that one, I've noticed it's not got a very solid click at the end of it. I don't know if there's anything I can do about that, or whether I should even bother trying to intervene in that. What I wanted to do was have a look at that tone control switch here. Now that must just go to the capacitor somewhere on there. I don't see the capacitor connected to the switch, so I was going to fiddle around with the value of that capacitance. So if you look at it on the circuit diagram, it's this this switch here, and so you can see you've got your volume control, and it just sticks this what looks like a 68 nanofarad capacitor across the volume control. So if we reduce the value of that capacitor, then we might improve the quality of the sound once the switch is in. And then we also, I did say it was a little bit too tinny when the switch is out, so maybe we should put another bypass capacitor in. Although I notice it has got one here. It's got a 0.047 there, so I'm not sure what this this pairing is quite for. Anyway, we can have a look at that. So let's get the board out, let's get the assembly out, the front panel off. I'm sort of going for these ones first here, that you can see in the corner there. I don't want to take that one off, because that to me would detach the tuning cord and stuff from there, so I'm going to take this out, see if that frees it from the rest of the case. I wonder if we need to get that pillar off. Yeah, that's the final key to it, I think. The whole thing should pull out, and we've lost a washer already. Now I can immediately see that slackening this bit off was a bad idea, because we've got the risk of the tuning mechanism coming apart from pulling this out, so I want to get that screwed back in as soon as I can before anything catastrophic happens. So there's the capacitor. I can just about get it. It's really annoying because I can't see any way to get this off except completely removing this assembly, and this is sort of welded onto that, so that's getting in the way of my trying to get at those pads where the capacitor is soldered on. Around here you can see it's quite dark, and you know, I think what I'll do is I'll take the front panel off, or at least take the speaker connections off, which should help out a bit with getting at this. Now I was wrong actually, that wasn't the capacitor I was looking for. The capacitor I was pointing at there turned out to be this 0.047 here, and not the C58. So then I decided to go on the hunt for where C58 really is. It's actually not shown anywhere on this layout. So C54 is the one I was looking at there, and the layout doesn't really show that it's actually underneath the board. There isn't a printed side layout on this manual. It's actually not a very good manual. It doesn't have dismantling instructions. It doesn't have a printed side layout of the board. It doesn't have a map to where the components are, and C58 isn't anywhere on here. Eventually I found out that it's here-ish, but pointing in a different direction. So obviously the board design has been changed from when the manual was written, and that's not unusual. This does tend to happen, and you don't necessarily know at this age whether there was a newer version of the manual. Maybe there was, and it's no longer available. Anyway, I found the thing in the end, and I changed both the capacitors as planned. So you might have noticed it looks a little bit different now from what it did before I put it back together, and the reason for that is, having taken this front grille off and tried to clean it up a bit, and I wasn't completely successful with that, but it's better than it was, I then found that behind the front grille is actually quite a nice sort of plastic chrome finish. It had a bit of glue on it, which I've cleaned off, and now I think it looks better without that grille on the front, so I've decided to leave it off. People might disagree. People might think it looks better with the grille, or maybe I should make a bit more effort with the grille. And it's arguable I haven't completely cleaned up the front panel, isn't it? You only see that when you get it on the camera. Anyway, what did we do? So, as we said, the problem really was here with this thing. I thought it was too much treble cut was being put on when you press this switch, and also it was too shrill when you didn't press the switch, so he couldn't quite get it right really. So I did two things. I reduced this to 47 nanofarads, and potentially I could have reduced it a little bit further and might still do. And then this one's 47 nanofarads, I increased to 100. And this is the one that's in circuit all the time. Now it looks a bit odd because you'd think it wouldn't make a lot of difference, but it does. And now it's much better really. So it's not quite as shrill once you've got the with the tone, the treble cut out. If we try and demonstrate that.
Around, selling from a great big briefcase or suitcase, sort of kitchen mops and things. And
it's also now not quite as muffled when you put the treble cut switch in. So that has improved it. That seems to have been the answer. Now, I still think it sounds a little harsh, certainly compared to the RGD Rover. And as Mrs. Radios was tidying up her own workshop yesterday evening, I decided to have a bit of listening to random sort of compressed pop music on the radio. And I listened to it with this radio for a while, and then with the RGD, and then with the smart speaker, and then with the proper hi-fi. And just gauge how tiring it is listening to each one. And the RGD did fairly well, but even that I felt was a little bit harsh with the treble cut out. But with the treble cut on, it sounded pretty good. This one was really the hardest to listen to still. Without the treble cut on, it was still a bit screechy, I felt. Smart speaker was fairly comfortable. Hi-fi obviously sounded nice, but the bass I felt was a bit too high on it. It's interesting because you're not listening to it. They're not really high quality sound sources, and sometimes that is what reveals it. It's easy enough to say, oh well, I'll put Radio 3 on, and obviously your hi-fi will be better with that, but in a lot of cases people aren't listening to Radio 3, they're listening to what is not a particularly high quality and very compressed sound source anyway. And it's possible that, if I was working on a building site, well, if I was working on a building site, you certainly wouldn't want to be living in any of the houses, but that this sort of radio with its harsh sound might cut through better with the sort of pop music station. So I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it. It's not going to be one of my favourites, but it's a worthwhile thing to do.